He was a billionaire who trusted no one. She was a nurse who cared for everyone. For 29 years, Elliot Ward had built walls around his heart so high that no woman could reach him, until one dying breath changed everything.
How long does he have?
Your father will receive excellent care, Mr. Ward. Not because of money, but because that's what we provide for all our patients.
It was supposed to be just another business transaction, managing his father's final days. But when Harold Ward smiled for the first time in decades, it wasn't for his son's success or his empire. It was for her gentle touch, her warm voice, her compassionate heart.
I've never seen him respond to anyone like that before.
Sometimes people say more when they know time is short. It might be worth listening.
Suddenly, the man who controlled everything found himself powerless against something he'd spent his life avoiding, the terrifying, beautiful risk of love. But can a heart frozen by decades of pain learn to beat again? And will Janelle see past his cold exterior to the broken man desperately trying to change? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The early morning fog draped itself across the vast Sonoma Valley vineyard like a silk veil. Elliot Ward stood on the balcony of his modern glass-walled office, surveying the empire that would soon be entirely his. At 29, he already controlled most of Ward Estates, the multi-million-dollar wine company his grandfather had started and his father had expanded. His tall frame was perfectly showcased in a tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his green eyes calculating as they swept over row after row of precious grapevines. "Mr. Ward, your 9 o'clock appointment is here." His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Elliot didn't turn around. "Tell them to wait." He took another moment to himself, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction at what he saw. Love was for fools and dreamers. Power and control were the only things that mattered in this world. He had learned that lesson 21 years ago, watching his mother walk out the door without a backward glance. "You won't ever see me cry over someone who doesn't want to stay," he had promised himself back then. It was a vow he had kept perfectly. The boardroom fell silent as Elliot entered. 6 executives in expensive suits straightened in their chairs. "The Miller deal is falling apart," Elliot said without greeting anyone. "Someone tell me why." Thomas Reynolds, the marketing director, cleared his throat. "They're concerned about our recent price increases. They've been with us for 15 years means nothing if they can't adapt to market realities," Elliot cut in. "Either they meet our new terms or we find distributors who will." "But your father always said that loyalty." "My father isn't running this company anymore," Elliot said coldly. "I am." The meeting continued for another hour, with Elliot shooting down objections and demanding results. When his phone rang and he saw his father's caretaker's number, he almost ignored it. Harold Ward had been declining for months, stubbornly refusing to see doctors until the pain became too much to bear. Now he was paying the price for his pride, just like his father, to be interrupting important business. "What is it?" Elliot answered sharply. "Mr. Ward, it's Margaret. Your father has collapsed. The ambulance is taking him to Cedar Grove Hospital. The doctor says you should come quickly." Something cold and unfamiliar twisted in Elliot's chest. "I'm in a meeting, Mr. Ward." Margaret's voice trembled. "The doctor said it might be time." Elliot ended the call without responding. He looked at the expectant faces around the table. "Meeting adjourned. We'll continue tomorrow." As Elliot drove his sleek black Porsche through the winding roads of Sonoma Valley, he told himself he was only going to the hospital to ensure his father's affairs were in order. There was no point in emotional attachments. Harold Ward had made that abundantly clear throughout Elliot's childhood. After his mother left, Elliot had tried for years to win his father's approval, his affection, anything, but Harold had sealed himself off, becoming as cold and unreachable as the stone walls of their mansion. Their relationship had devolved into a business arrangement. Harold teaching Elliot how to run the company, how to be ruthless in negotiations, how to never show weakness. Love was never part of the equation. Cedar Grove Hospital was modest compared to the luxury medical centers Elliot was accustomed to. He frowned as he parked, wondering why the ambulance had brought his father here instead of to the prestigious Sonoma Medical Center, where the wards were donors. "Proximity," the emergency doctor explained when Elliot demanded answers. "Your father needed immediate attention. He's stabilized for now, but I won't sugarcoat this, Mr. Ward. The cancer has spread aggressively. We're moving him to the palliative care unit." "Palliative?" Elliot's voice was sharp. "You mean you're giving up?" The doctor's face softened with practiced sympathy. "We're focusing on his comfort now. I'm very sorry." Elliot felt nothing, or at least That's what he told himself as he followed a nurse down the corridor to his father's room. Harold Ward had lived without love for decades. He would die the same way. The man in the hospital bed barely resembled the imposing figure who had ruled the Ward estate with an iron fist. Harold's face was gaunt, his once powerful frame shrunken beneath the white sheets. His eyes were closed, his breathing labored. "Has he been conscious?" Elliot asked the nurse, keeping his distance from the bed. "On and off," she replied. "The medication makes him drift." Elliot stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. What was he supposed to do now? Hold his father's hand? Cry? Tell him he was loved? They both knew better than that. "I'll come back tomorrow," he finally said. "Have someone call me if there are any changes." As Elliot turned to leave, a woman entered the room carrying a chart. She wore light blue scrubs, her dark skin contrasting with the white hospital walls. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her brown eyes showed a quiet strength that made Elliot pause. "Mr. Ward, I'm Janelle Rivers. I'll be your father's primary nurse during his stay with us." Elliot assessed her quickly, the way he did everyone. She was probably in her late 20s, around his age. Professional, but with a gentleness that seemed genuine rather than practiced. No wedding ring, simple stud earrings, no excessive makeup. "How long does he have?" Elliot asked bluntly. If Janelle was shocked by his directness, she didn't show it. It's difficult to say exactly. With this type of advanced cancer, it could be weeks or days. "I see. Well, he's getting the best care money can buy, I assume?" Something flickered in Janelle's eyes, not quite judgment, but an observance that made Elliot feel oddly exposed. "Your father will receive excellent care, Mr. Ward, not because of money, but because that's what we provide for all our patients." Her voice was firm but kind, and Elliot found himself momentarily without a sharp retort. Before he could form a response, Harold stirred in the bed. "Who's there?" the old man asked, his voice a rasp of its former commanding tone. Janelle immediately moved to his side, checking the monitors. "It's your son, Mr. Ward. Elliot is here to see you." Harold's eyes opened, cloudy with medication and pain. They fixed on Elliot with an intensity that was uncomfortable. "Come to check if I'm dead yet?" Harold asked. Elliot's jaw tightened. "Just making sure you're getting what you need." Harold made a sound that might have been a laugh. "What I need, that's rich coming from you." Janelle adjusted Harold's pillow with gentle hands. "Mr. Ward, would you like some water?" To Elliot's surprise, his father's harsh expression softened as he looked at the nurse. "Thank you, young lady." Elliot watched in disbelief as Janelle helped his father drink, her movements calm and efficient, but somehow personal too. Harold Ward, who barked orders at servants and spoke to women as if they were decorative objects, was responding to this nurse with something close to respect. "The doctor has prescribed something for the pain," Janelle explained. "It might make you drowsy, but it will help you rest." "Fine, fine," Harold agreed, still watching her face. Then his eyes shifted back to Elliot, hardening again. "You can go now. I'm sure you have important business to attend to." The dismissal was familiar, but it stung in ways Elliot refused to acknowledge. "I'll check in tomorrow," he said stiffly. As Elliot turned to leave, Janelle spoke again. "Mr. Ward, visiting hours end at 8. Your father will probably sleep for a while now, but you're welcome to come back this evening." Something in her tone, not pity exactly, but a simple human connection, made Elliot uncomfortable. "I have meetings," he said shortly, and strode out of the room. But as he walked down the sterile hospital corridor, Elliot couldn't shake the image of Janelle Rivers' steady gaze or the way his father had responded to her. For a man who trusted no one, especially women, Harold's reaction was unexpected. Back at the vineyard, Elliot tried to focus on work, but found his mind drifting to the hospital. Not to his father, he told himself firmly, but to the strange dynamic he had witnessed. By evening, he had convinced himself he needed to return to discuss financial arrangements for his father's care. The hospital was quieter now, the bustle of the day shift replaced by the muted efficiency of night staff. Elliot made his way to his father's room, expecting to find Harold asleep. Instead, he stopped short at the doorway, unseen by the room's occupants. Janelle was sitting in a chair beside Harold's bed, reading aloud from what appeared to be a book about wine cultivation. "The French oak barrels impart vanilla and spice notes," she read, "while American oak tends to give stronger, sweeter flavors like coconut and dill." "Humph," Harold interrupted weakly. "That's oversimplified. The terroir matters more than the barrel. Always has." Janelle smiled, not offended by his correction. "Terroir? That's the growing environment, right?" "It's everything," Harold said, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. "The soil, the climate, the slope of the hill, even the nearby plants. You can't separate the wine from where it grew. Each bottle tells the story of its home. Elliot stood frozen in the hallway. He had never heard his father speak this way, passionate about wine as more than a business commodity. In board meetings, Harold discussed profit margins and market expansion. Here, with this stranger, he was talking about wine as if it were a living thing. "That's beautiful," Janelle said. "Like people, shaped by where we come from." Harold was quiet for a moment. "You remind me of someone." "Oh, who's that?" "My wife, Elliot's mother. She used to say things like that." Elliot felt his chest tighten. His father never mentioned his mother. Her name had been banned from their home after she left. "She had a softness about her," Harold continued, his voice distant. "I didn't understand it, thought it was weakness." "And now?" Janelle asked gently. Harold sighed, the sound rattling in his chest. "Now I wonder if I was the weak one, too afraid to feel anything." Elliot stepped back, unwilling to hear more. This wasn't his father talking. It was the medication, making him delirious and sentimental. The Harold Ward he knew would never admit to weakness or regret. As Elliot drove back to his empty mansion that night, he told himself he was angry at Janelle Rivers for encouraging his father's medication-induced ramblings. But deeper down, in a place he refused to examine, he was disturbed by the glimpse of a man he had never known, a Harold Ward who understood beauty and regret, who might have once known how to love. The next morning, Elliot arrived at the hospital earlier than necessary for his meeting with the doctor. He told himself it was to get a full update on his father's condition before the workday began. It had nothing to do with the nurse who might be finishing her night shift. When he stepped off the elevator, he spotted Janelle at the nurse's station, writing in a chart. She looked tired but still somehow vibrant, her simple scrubs more alive than the designer clothes worn by the women in Elliot's social circle. "Mr. Ward," she said, looking up as he approached. "You're here early." "How is he?" Elliot asked, avoiding small talk. "He had a restful night. The pain management is working well." She hesitated, then added, "He talked about you." Elliot stiffened. "I'm sure whatever he said wasn't flattering." Janelle studied him for a moment. "Actually, he was remembering when you were little, before your mother left." The mention of his mother from this stranger's lips felt like an invasion. "That's not relevant to his medical care. Maybe not to his physical care," Janelle said quietly. "But people aren't just bodies, Mr. Ward. Especially at the end of life, the heart and mind need tending too." "Save the philosophy for someone who appreciates it," Elliot said coldly. "I'm here to speak with Dr. Chen about my father's prognosis." Janelle didn't seem offended by his dismissal. "Dr. Chen will be here at 7:30. Your father is awake if you'd like to see him while you wait." Elliot hesitated, then nodded curtly and walked toward his father's room. Before he entered, he heard Janelle call after him. "Mr. Ward? Sometimes people say more when they know time is short. It might be worth listening." Elliot didn't acknowledge her words, but they followed him into the room where his father lay waiting, perhaps for death, perhaps for something Elliot couldn't name. Harold was sitting up slightly, looking out the window at the early morning light. He turned when Elliot entered, his face unreadable. "You came back," Harold said. "I told you I would." Elliot remained standing, maintaining the distance that had defined their relationship for decades. "That nurse," Harold said after a moment. "Janelle, she's something, isn't she?" Elliot shrugged. "She seems competent. More than competent. She listens, really listens." Harold's eyes, though dulled by medication, fixed on his son with uncomfortable intensity. "When was the last time you listened to anyone, Elliot? Really heard them?" "I didn't come here for life lessons," Elliot said stiffly. "No, you came to check on your investment. Make sure dear old dad isn't costing too much on his way out." The words stung, but Elliot kept his face impassive. "Dr. Chen will be here soon to discuss your care." "My care?" Harold laughed bitterly. 21 years too late for that, isn't it?" Before Elliot could respond, Janelle entered with a tray of medication. She smiled at both men, seemingly unaffected by the tension in the room. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," she said to Harold. "How's your pain level this morning on a scale of 1 to 10? 4, Harold replied, his voice noticeably gentler. "Manageable. That's good to hear. I've brought your morning medication." She efficiently prepared a syringe while continuing to chat. "I was thinking about what you said about terroir last night. It made me wonder if that's why some wines cost so much more than others." To Elliot's astonishment, his father chuckled. "Partly, but a lot of it is just marketing. People thinking price equals quality." "Really?" Janelle raised her eyebrows as she administered the injection with practiced ease. "So I could be drinking wines just as good as the expensive ones?" Some of my best discoveries have been $10 bottles, Harold admitted. There was a Spanish red I found once in a little grocery store. Elliot watched in disbelief as his father launched into a story about a wine-tasting trip to Barcelona, a story Elliot had never heard before. Harold's face came alive as he described the small vineyards and passionate winemakers he had met, people who created wine for love rather than profit. Janelle listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. When Harold finished his story, she smiled. "You should tell your son more of these stories. They're fascinating." Harold's animation faded as he glanced at Elliot. "My son is interested in balance sheets, not stories." The words hung in the air between them, a truth neither could deny. Elliot had become exactly what his father had shaped him to be, focused on profit, suspicious of emotion, closed off to connections that couldn't be quantified. "I'll leave you two to talk," Janelle said, sensing the tension. "Dr. Chen should be here soon." As she left, Elliot felt an irrational urge to call her back, to keep her as a buffer between himself and the father he didn't know how to talk to. "She's wasting her talents in a place like this," Harold said unexpectedly. "That young woman has a gift for people. Reminds me of your mother that way." Elliot stiffened. "You've mentioned mother twice now. That's twice more than in the last 20 years. Harold was quiet for a long moment. "Dying has a way of making you see things differently. Delirium is a common symptom in terminal patients," Elliot said coldly. "There it is." Harold's laugh was hollow. "That wall you built. I recognize it because I taught you how to build it, brick by brick." "I have a company to run," Elliot said, checking his watch. "Dr. Chen is late." "Do you know why I brought you into the business so young?" Harold asked, ignoring Elliot's attempt to change the subject. "Why I pushed you so hard?" "Because you needed an heir," Elliot replied automatically. "Because I needed you to be stronger than I was," Harold said, his voice suddenly weary. "When your mother left, it broke something in me. I couldn't let that happen to you." Elliot felt a strange tightness in his chest. "So you taught me that relationships are weakness, that love is for fools." "I taught you what I believed," Harold admitted. "I'm not sure anymore if I was right." Before Elliot could process this unprecedented admission, Dr. Chen entered the room, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," he said, addressing both men. "I've reviewed the latest tests, and I'd like to discuss where we go from here." The conversation that followed was clinical and direct. Harold's cancer had spread to his liver and bones. The focus now was purely on keeping him comfortable for whatever time he had left. Days, perhaps weeks at most. Elliot listened with his business face on, asking about medications, costs, options. Not once did he look at his father during the discussion. It was easier to treat this as a business matter, a problem to be managed efficiently. When Dr. Chen left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. "So that's it," Harold finally said. "The great Harold Ward, felled by microscopic cells." "There are experimental treatments," Elliot began. "No." Harold's voice was firm. "I'm done fighting. I'm tired, Elliot." Something about the simple admission, "I'm tired," cut through Elliot's defenses. For a moment, he saw not the ruthless businessman or the cold father, but simply an old man facing the end. "What do you need from me?" Elliot asked, the question more genuine than any he had asked his father in years. Harold looked surprised by the question. "Just come back sometimes. Not for me, for yourself." Elliot didn't know how to respond to that. He stood, straightening his tie in a habitual gesture. "I have meetings this afternoon, but I'll return this evening." "The Ward estates won't collapse if you take an afternoon off," Harold said dryly. "The Miller deal is still the Miller deal." Harold shook his head. "Paul Miller's father was my friend, you know. Really knew his wines. Paul's not as sharp, but he's loyal." Elliot frowned. "Loyalty doesn't pay the bills." "No, but it gets you through the hard times." Harold's eyes were suddenly piercing. "Who will stand by you in your hard times, Elliot? Who will hold your hand when you're where I am now?" The question hit Elliot like a physical blow. He had associates, not friends. Lovers, not partners. His life was structured around acquisition and achievement, not connection. "I'll see you this evening," Elliot said, refusing to engage with the question. As he left the room, he nearly collided with Janelle, who was returning with a fresh water pitcher. "Mr. Ward," she said, steadying herself. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Elliot said shortly, but found himself unable to move past her. Janelle tilted her head slightly. "You know, your father lights up when he talks about wine. Not the business of it, but the art of it. I'd never thought about wine that way before." "Neither had I," Elliot admitted before he could stop himself. "Maybe you could ask him about it," she suggested gently. "People like to share the things they love, especially when time is limited." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that Elliot couldn't ignore. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding emotional entanglements, seeing them as traps that would eventually lead to pain. But standing in this hospital corridor, facing this woman who seemed to see through his carefully constructed facade, he felt something shift inside him, a hairline crack in the wall he had built around his heart. "I have to go," he said abruptly. Janelle nodded, not pushing further. "Your father will be here when you're ready." As Elliot walked away, he heard her enter his father's room, her warm voice greeting Harold. And for the first time in his adult life, Elliot Ward felt something dangerously close to envy, not for wealth or power or success, but for the simple human connection that seemed to come so naturally to Janelle Rivers. That evening, as the sun set over the vineyards of Ward Estates, Elliot sat in his office, unable to focus on the contracts before him. His thoughts kept returning to the hospital, to his dying father, and to the nurse whose quiet strength had somehow broken through decades of practiced indifference. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would return to the hospital and really listen to his father. Not because Harold deserved it, but because Elliot suddenly, desperately needed to understand the man whose bitterness had shaped his life, before it was too late. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Elliot's office as he stared at his computer screen without really seeing it. The quarterly reports needed his attention, but his mind kept drifting back to Cedar Grove Hospital, to his father's words, to Janelle Rivers and her quiet strength. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Ward, the board is waiting for you in the conference room." Elliot checked his watch. He was 10 minutes late, something that had never happened before. "Tell them to start without me," he said, surprising himself as much as his assistant. "I have somewhere I need to be." 20 minutes later, Elliot parked his Porsche in the hospital lot. He sat for a moment, questioning what he was doing. The Ward Estates board meeting was happening without him. The Miller deal was still unresolved, and here he was, drawn back to his dying father, as if there was something left to salvage between them. As Elliot walked through the hospital entrance, he spotted Janelle at the reception desk. She was speaking with an elderly woman, her hand resting gently on the woman's arm as she explained something. The woman nodded, visibly comforted by Janelle's words. Elliot found himself pausing, watching the interaction. There was something about Janelle that seemed so genuine, a quality rare in his world of calculated business moves and strategic relationships. When Janelle looked up and saw him, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "Mr. Ward," she said, excusing herself from the elderly woman. "I didn't expect to see you this morning." "How is he?" Elliot asked, ignoring the small flutter in his chest at her smile. "Better than yesterday, actually. He's been talking more, even ate some breakfast." Elliot nodded, unsure why this news brought him relief. His father's death was inevitable. A few good hours didn't change that. "He's been asking for you," Janelle added, her eyes studying his face. "I think he was surprised you said you'd come back in the evening." "I had a meeting," Elliot said defensively. "And yet here you are," Janelle observed, her tone free of judgment. They walked together toward Harold's room, an awkward silence between them. "Your father told me you took over most of the business operations a few years ago," Janelle said finally. "That must have been a lot of responsibility at a young age." "I was prepared for it," Elliot replied stiffly. "It's what I was raised to do." "Was it what you wanted to do?" The question caught Elliot off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Not his father, not his business associates, not even the women he occasionally dated. "What I wanted wasn't relevant," he said after a moment. Janelle glanced at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "It usually is, though. Relevant, I mean." Before Elliot could respond, they reached his father's room. Harold was sitting up in bed looking out the window. He seemed smaller somehow, his once commanding presence diminished by illness, yet there was a strange peacefulness about him that Elliot had never seen before. "You have a visitor, Mr. Ward," Janelle announced cheerfully. Harold turned, genuine surprise crossing his face when he saw Elliot. "What happened to your meeting?" "It can wait," Elliot said, feeling oddly self-conscious. Janelle checked Harold's vital signs, making notes on his chart. "Your father was just telling me about the first vineyard your family purchased. It sounds beautiful." "The South Ridge property," Harold confirmed. "Best Cabernet grapes in the valley. The original vines are over 60 years old now." "We're replacing those next season," Elliot said automatically. "The yield is down 15% from 5 years ago." Harold's face clouded. "Those vines have character. The wine they produce has depth you can't get from new plantings." "Character doesn't pay the bills," Elliot countered, falling into their familiar pattern of disagreement. "Gentlemen," Janelle interrupted gently, Perhaps this is a conversation for another time. Mr. Ward needs to conserve his energy. Harold waved a dismissive hand. I'm dying, nurse. Arguing with my son is the most normal thing I can do right now. Despite the gravity of his words, there was a hint of humor in Harold's voice that Elliot had rarely heard. He found himself almost smiling in response. I'll leave you two to talk, Janelle said. But remember, Mr. Ward, you promised to try some lunch today. After she left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Elliot moved to the window, looking out at the hospital garden rather than at his father. You should be at the board meeting, Harold finally said. They can handle it without me. Since when? Elliot turned to face his father. What's that supposed to mean? You've been running yourself into the ground since you were 25, Harold said bluntly. Never taking a day off, never delegating, just like I taught you. It's called responsibility, Elliot said defensively. It's called fear, Harold countered, his eyes suddenly sharp. Fear that if you let go even a little, everything will fall apart. I know because I lived that way too. Elliot wanted to argue, to defend the work ethic his father had instilled in him, but Harold's admission that he had lived with the same fear made the words die in his throat. Why are you saying these things now? Elliot asked instead, frustration edging into his voice. You spent my entire life telling me emotion was weakness, that success was all that mattered. And now what? You've had some deathbed epiphany and I'm supposed to just accept it? Harold didn't flinch at his son's anger. Yes, I did teach you those things, and I was wrong. The simple admission landed like a physical blow. Elliot had spent his life trying to live up to his father's expectations, trying to be the man Harold had demanded he become. To hear now that it had all been a mistake was almost too much to bear. You don't get to say that, Elliot said, his voice dangerously quiet. Not after everything. Harold looked at his son, real regret in his eyes. No, I probably don't, but I'm saying it anyway, because soon I won't be able to say anything at all. The reality of his father's impending death hit Elliot anew. No matter how complicated their relationship, the world without Harold Ward in it was unimaginable. A soft knock at the door interrupted the tense moment. Janelle entered with a lunch tray. Sorry to interrupt, but I promised the doctor I'd make sure Mr. Ward ate something today, she said, her warm smile somehow easing the tension in the room. She set up the tray with efficient movements, helping Harold adjust his position. I snuck in some decent coffee instead of the hospital brew, she whispered conspiratorially. Don't tell Dr. Chen. Harold's face softened as he looked at her. You're an angel, Janelle. Elliot watched the interaction with a strange feeling in his chest. His father, who had spent decades treating employees as disposable assets, was looking at this nurse with genuine appreciation, not for her utility, but for her kindness. I got some for you too, Mr. Ward, Janelle said, turning to Elliot and offering him a cup. You look like you could use it. Their fingers brushed as he took the cup, and Elliot felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. He covered his reaction by taking a quick sip. Thank you, he said stiffly. I need to check on my other patients, but I'll be back later, Janelle said. At the door she paused, looking back at them. You know, some of my favorite moments with my grandmother are when we disagree about something. That's when you really get to know a person, when you see what matters to them enough to argue about. After she left, Elliot found himself wondering about Janelle's grandmother, about their relationship. It was such a normal thought, so human, so unlike his usual calculating assessments of people. That young woman, Harold said, interrupting Elliot's thoughts, reminds me of what I could have been if I hadn't let bitterness consume me after your mother left. Elliot tensed at the mention of his mother. You never talk about her. No, I don't, Harold agreed, pushing his food around on the plate. I thought if I never spoke of her, I could pretend she hadn't mattered, that she hadn't broken my heart when she walked out that door. Why did she leave? The question escaped before Elliot could stop it. A child's question, one he had stopped asking long ago when he realized no answer would ever come. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Because I made it impossible for her to stay, he finally said. I was so focused on building the business, on creating an empire that would last generations, that I forgot to build a life with her. By the time I realized what was happening, she had already checked out of our marriage emotionally. Elliot stared at his father, trying to reconcile this admission with the narrative he had constructed over the years, that his mother had been selfish, had abandoned them for a more exciting life. She tried to tell me, Harold continued, his voice distant with memory, said I was becoming cold, unreachable, that I looked at her like an asset rather than a wife. So I told her she was being dramatic. The word struck uncomfortably close to things Elliot had said to women who had tried to get close to him over the years. Why didn't she take me with her? The question was barely a whisper, exposing a vulnerability Elliot had buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed. Harold's eyes filled with a regret so profound it was difficult to witness. She wanted to. I threatened to use every resource I had to fight her in court if she tried. I told her she'd never win against my lawyers, my money. The revelation hit Elliot like a physical blow. All these years, he had believed his mother hadn't wanted him enough to stay. The truth, that his father had essentially held him hostage in a power play, was almost too much to process. "You had no right," Elliot said, his voice shaking with a rage he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. "No, I didn't," Harold agreed, not defending himself. "I was selfish and cruel. I told myself I was protecting you, but really, I just couldn't bear to lose you both." Elliot stood abruptly, needing to put distance between himself and his father's confessions. "I have to go." "Elliot," Harold called as he reached the door. "I'm not telling you this to ease my conscience. I'm telling you because you still have time to choose a different path." Elliot didn't respond. Couldn't respond. He strode down the hospital corridor, barely seeing where he was going, his mind a chaotic swirl of emotions he had no practice in managing. He nearly collided with Janelle as she emerged from another patient's room. "Mr. Ward, is everything all right?" Her concerned eyes searched his face. "Fine," he said curtly, trying to move past her. Janelle gently touched his arm, stopping him. "You don't look fine. Do you want to sit down for a minute? There's a quiet room down the hall." Something in her voice, genuine concern without pity, made it impossible to maintain his usual defensive wall. He allowed her to guide him to a small room furnished with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. "What happened?" she asked after closing the door. "My father decided to rewrite our entire family history," Elliot said bitterly. "Apparently he's been having regrets." Janelle sat across from him, her presence somehow calming despite his inner turmoil. "Facing death has a way of bringing clarity," she said quietly. "Things that seemed important suddenly don't. Mistakes loom larger. So I'm supposed to forgive him? Just like that?" Elliot ran a hand through his usually perfect hair. "He just told me he prevented my mother from taking me with her when she left, that he used his money and power to threaten her." Understanding dawned in Janelle's eyes. "And all this time, you thought she didn't want you." The simple truth of her words cracked something open inside Elliot. 21 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For 21 years, I believed she walked away without a backward glance." "I'm so sorry," Janelle said, and the genuine empathy in her voice made it hard for Elliot to maintain his composure. "The thing is," he continued, unable to stop now that he had started, "he shaped me into his image. Taught me that business came first, that emotions were weakness, that relationships were liabilities, and now he tells me it was all a mistake." Janelle was quiet for a moment, considering. "People rarely change completely, even at the end," she finally said. "But sometimes they see things more clearly. Maybe your father is trying to give you the chance to make different choices than he did." "It's too late," Elliot said flatly. "I am who I am." "Is it too late?" Janelle challenged gently. "You're sitting here having this conversation. The Elliot Ward your father describes wouldn't be doing that." Her words made him pause. It was true. The man he had been even a week ago wouldn't have skipped a board meeting to visit his dying father, wouldn't be sitting in a hospital quiet room having an emotional conversation with a nurse. "I don't know how to be anyone else," he admitted, the honesty of the statement surprising even him. "Maybe you don't have to figure it all out at once," Janelle suggested. "Maybe it's enough to just start asking yourself what you really want, not what you think you should want." Elliot looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Her dark eyes held a quiet wisdom that seemed beyond her years. Her hands, resting calmly in her lap, were strong and capable. There was nothing flashy or artificial about her, nothing calculated or strategic. She was simply, authentically herself. "What do you want, Janelle?" he found himself asking. "Beyond this job, beyond taking care of difficult patients and their even more difficult families?" A smile touched her lips. "Interesting deflection technique." "I'm genuinely curious," Elliot insisted, and realized it was true. He wanted to know more about this woman who seemed so at peace with herself. "I want to make a difference," she said simply. "Big or small, it doesn't matter. I want to go to bed each night knowing that someone's day was better, because I was in it." The simplicity of her answer moved him unexpectedly. In his world of acquisition and power, such a straightforward human desire seemed almost radical. "And your grandmother?" he asked, remembering her earlier comment. You mentioned disagreeing with her. Janelle's face softened with affection. She raised me after my mother died, giving birth to me. She's the strongest person I know, stubborn as they come, but with the biggest heart. We argue about everything from politics to what makes a proper Sunday dinner, but I never doubt for a second that she loves me. The easy way Janelle spoke of love as something reliable and constant highlighted the emptiness of Elliot's own emotional landscape. When was the last time anyone had loved him? When was the last time he had allowed it? She sounds remarkable, Elliot said. She is. You should meet her sometime. She loves giving advice to, as she puts it, lost souls. Janelle's eyes twinkled with gentle humor. And is that what I am? A lost soul? Elliot asked, surprised to find he wasn't offended by the implication. I think you're someone at a crossroads, Janelle replied thoughtfully, and I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. Before Elliot could ask what she meant, her pager beeped. She checked it and stood quickly. I need to get back to work, she said. Will you be okay? Elliot nodded, suddenly self-conscious about how much he had revealed to this woman he barely knew. Thank you for listening, Janelle smiled, and something warm unfurled in Elliot's chest. That's what I'm here for. Will you be coming back later today? Yes, he said, the decision made before he'd even consciously considered it. After I handle a few things at the office. Good. I think your father would like that. As Janelle hurried back to her duties, Elliot remained seated, trying to process everything that had happened. His father's revelations, his own unexpected emotional response, and this strange connection he felt with Janelle Rivers. It was all so far outside his normal experience that he felt almost dizzy with it. When he finally left the hospital, Elliot didn't drive directly back to Ward Estates as he had planned. Instead, he found himself taking the coastal road, driving with no particular destination in mind. The vineyards gave way to ocean views, the endless blue horizon somehow matching the unfamiliar sense of possibility opening up inside him. His phone rang repeatedly. His assistant, board members, the legal team working on the Miller deal. For the first time in his adult life, Elliot let the calls go to voicemail. Whatever crises they were facing at Ward Estates, they would have to wait. By late afternoon, Elliot found himself parked outside a modest house in a working-class Oakland neighborhood. He checked the address on his phone again, confirming he was in the right place. The small front yard was neatly kept, with bright flowers in window boxes and a porch swing that looked well used. Elliot wasn't entirely sure why he was here or what he planned to say. He only knew that after his conversation with Janelle, he had used his considerable resources to locate his mother, something he had never allowed himself to do before. Patricia Ward, now Patricia Delgado, lived in this unassuming house with her husband of 15 years. She worked as a high school art teacher. She had no other children. Elliot sat in his car, heart pounding, unable to make himself approach the door. What would he say to this woman who had been a ghost in his life for 21 years? What could possibly bridge the gulf of time and pain between them? As the sun began to set, Elliot finally started his car again. He wasn't ready for this confrontation. Not yet. But for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that someday he might be. Back at the hospital that evening, Elliot found his father asleep and Janelle updating charts at the nurse's station. He had a rough afternoon, she said when she saw Elliot approach. The pain increased, so Dr. Chen adjusted his medication. He's been sleeping for about an hour now. I should have been here, Elliot said, feeling an unfamiliar sense of guilt. You're here now, Janelle replied simply. That's what matters. She walked with him to Harold's room, her presence somehow steadying. Harold looked frailer than he had that morning, his breathing labored even in sleep. How long? Elliot asked quietly. Janelle's eyes were compassionate but honest. It's hard to say exactly, but he's declining faster than we expected. Days, maybe. The reality of his father's imminent death settled over Elliot like a physical weight. Despite their complicated relationship, despite the anger he still felt over the morning's revelations, the finality of losing his father struck him with unexpected force. I'll sit with him for a while, Elliot said, moving to the chair beside the bed. I'll be at the nurse's station if you need anything, Janelle said, touching his shoulder lightly before leaving. Alone with his sleeping father, Elliot struggled with the conflicting emotions coursing through him, anger at the manipulations and lies, grief for the relationship they had never had, and beneath it all, a growing sense that time was running out for any kind of resolution between them. I found Mom today, Elliot said quietly to his unconscious father. I drove to her house, but I couldn't get out of the car. I don't know if I wanted to yell at her, or hug her, or just see her face again. Harold didn't stir, but speaking the words aloud somehow made Elliot feel less alone with the weight of them. "You shaped me into your image," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Taught me to be cold, calculating, focused only on success. And I was good at it, better than even you expected. But what was it all for? What do I have to show for it except an empty house and a company full of people who fear me?" Elliot leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know how to be different. I don't know if I can be." The soft sound of the door opening made Elliot straighten up quickly, composing his features into their usual mask of control. Janelle entered with a cup of coffee, which she handed to him without comment. "Thank you," he said, grateful for both the caffeine and her discretion in not acknowledging whatever she might have overheard. "You're welcome," she replied with a small smile. "I'm about to end my shift, but Angela will be taking over. She's excellent. Your father likes her." "You're leaving?" Elliot asked, surprised by his disappointment. "Just until tomorrow morning," Janelle assured him. "I'll be back at 7. She checked Harold's vital signs efficiently, then hesitated at the door. "Mr. Ward, Elliot, can I say something a bit personal?" The use of his first name caught him off guard. "Go ahead." "In my 5 years as a nurse, I've seen a lot of families facing the end together. The ones who find peace aren't the ones who resolve everything, or forgive everything. They're the ones who at least try to see each other clearly, even if it's just for a moment." Her words resonated with something deep inside Elliot, a longing to be seen, to be known, that he had buried beneath years of practiced indifference. "Thank you, Janelle," he said, meaning it. After she left, Elliot settled back in the chair, watching his father's labored breathing. Outside the window, the night had fallen completely, the darkness broken only by the scattered lights of the city below. Harold stirred, his eyes opening slowly, clouded with medication and pain. It took him a moment to focus on Elliot. "You came back," he said, his voice barely audible. "I said I would," Elliot replied, echoing their exchange from that morning. Harold's hand moved slightly on the blanket, a small gesture that Elliot recognized as an invitation. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and took his father's hand. It felt fragile in his grasp, the skin thin and cool, so different from the strong hand that had guided and sometimes pushed him throughout his childhood. "I went to Mom's house today," Elliot said, the confession easier now that his father was barely conscious. "I didn't go in, but I found her." Harold's eyes widened slightly. "Patricia? How is she?" "She seems to have a good life. Simple, but good." Elliot paused, then asked the question that had been haunting him. "Did you ever try to find her?" "After she left?" Harold's gaze drifted to the window. "Once, about 5 years after she left. I hired a private investigator, told myself it was to make sure she wasn't planning to come back and disrupt our lives. But really, I just needed to know she was okay," Harold admitted. "The investigator found her in San Diego, teaching art at a community center, dating a musician. She looked happy in the photos, happier than she'd been with me in years." Elliot absorbed this, trying to imagine his father secretly checking up on the woman he had driven away. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was a coward," Harold said simply. "Because it was easier to make her the villain than to admit my part in it all." The honesty of the admission struck Elliot deeply. His father had never acknowledged fault or weakness before. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Elliot said after a long silence, "for lying about Mom, for shaping me into someone who doesn't know how to connect with people." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Harold replied, his voice growing weaker. "Just for you to learn from my mistakes. Don't wait until you're dying to realize what matters." The words hung between them, heavy with decades of unspoken regrets. Elliot felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Rest now," Elliot said, still holding his father's hand. "I'll be here." Harold's eyes closed, his breathing evening out slightly as he drifted back to sleep. Elliot remained in the chair, watching over his father as the night deepened around them, feeling as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to step back into the familiar terrain of emotional isolation or forward into the unknown territory of genuine human connection. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a pair of kind brown eyes seemed to be watching, waiting to see which path he would choose. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over Harold's sleeping form. Elliot sat in the same chair he had occupied most of the night, his suit wrinkled, his eyes heavy with fatigue. He had dozed off occasionally, but never for long, afraid to miss any moment of his father's increasingly precious time. The door opened quietly and Janelle entered. She was dressed in fresh scrubs, her hair neatly arranged, but there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't rested well either. "You stayed all night," she said softly, surprise evident in her voice. Elliot nodded, stretching his stiff muscles. "I couldn't leave him alone." Something in Janelle's expression softened as she moved to check Harold's vital signs. "That means a lot, you know, even if he wasn't awake to see it." "How is he?" Elliot asked, watching her efficient movements. Janelle's professional demeanor couldn't quite mask her concern. "His breathing is more labored, and his heart rate is irregular. I'm going to page Dr. Chen." Fear, sharp and unfamiliar, shot through Elliot. Is it time?" "Not yet," Janelle said gently, "but I think we're getting closer. Has he been responsive at all during the night?" "He woke up a few times, just for a minute or two. He seemed confused." Elliot ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "The last time, around dawn, he called me by my grandfather's name." Janelle nodded. "That's common near the end. The mind starts to drift between past and present." The clinical reality of his father's approaching death hit Elliot with new force. Soon, Harold Ward would be gone, taking with him any chance of resolution, any possibility of a different kind of relationship. "I'll get you some coffee," Janelle offered, touching his shoulder briefly before leaving the room. Alone with his father, Elliot leaned forward in his chair. "Dad," he said, the word feeling strange on his lips after years of formal address. "If you can hear me, I need you to hold on a little longer. There's still too much we haven't said." Harold's eyes fluttered but didn't open. His breathing remained shallow and uneven. Elliot's phone vibrated in his pocket, the latest in a stream of messages and calls he had been ignoring since yesterday. With a sigh, he checked the screen. It was Thomas Reynolds, the marketing director, with a message marked urgent. "Miller is pulling out of the deal. Rumors of instability at Ward Estates with your absence. Board called emergency meeting at 10 a.m. Your presence required." Elliot stared at the message, feeling the pull of his two worlds. The business empire that had defined his identity for so long was facing a crisis that demanded his attention, and yet the thought of leaving his father's bedside felt impossible. Janelle returned with coffee and a bagel. "You should eat something," she said, handing him the modest breakfast. "You can't take care of anyone if you don't take care of yourself." "The board is meeting in 2 hours," Elliot said, not touching the food. "The Miller deal is falling apart." "Is that important?" Janelle asked simply. "It's a multi-million-dollar distribution contract," Elliot replied automatically. "Of course it's important." "That's not what I asked," Janelle said gently. "I asked if it was important to you right now, compared to being here." The question cut through the familiar fog of business priorities and financial calculations. 6 months ago, even a week ago, there would have been no question. Ward Estates would have come first, as it always had. But now, looking at his father's frail form, feeling the weight of their unfinished business, Elliot wasn't so sure. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty of it surprising him. Janelle smiled slightly. "That's a more honest answer than most people would give." Before Elliot could respond, Dr. Chen entered the room. The doctor examined Harold thoroughly, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Mr. Ward," he said finally, addressing Elliot, "your father's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight. His organs are beginning to shut down. I think it would be wise to prepare yourself. We're likely talking about hours now, not days." The words landed like physical blows. Despite knowing this moment was coming, Elliot felt unprepared for the finality of it. "Is he in pain?" he asked, his voice not quite steady. "We're managing his comfort as best we can," Dr. Chen assured him. "But I should warn you that the end stages can be difficult to witness. If you need to step out at any point, that's completely understandable." "I'm not leaving him," Elliot said firmly. After the doctor left, Janelle adjusted Harold's medication and straightened his blankets with gentle hands. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said softly. "Just press the call button." Alone with his father, Elliot felt the weight of time slipping away. There was so much he wanted to say, to ask, to understand, but Harold was beyond conversation now, drifting in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words that made no sense. Elliot's phone buzzed again. Thomas Reynolds, then his assistant, then the company lawyer. The outside world demanding his attention, unaware or uncaring that his was ending. With sudden decision, Elliot turned off his phone completely. Whatever crisis was unfolding at Ward Estates would have to unfold without him. The hours that followed passed in a strange blur of time. Nurses came and went. Monitors beeped. Harold's breathing grew more labored, then settled into a new, shallower rhythm. Elliot remained at his side, sometimes speaking softly about memories from his childhood, sometimes sitting in silence, holding his father's increasingly cold hand. Janelle checked in regularly, her presence a quiet comfort in the sterile hospital room. She didn't offer empty platitudes or false hope, just simple human connection when Elliot needed it most. Around noon, Harold stirred, his eyes opening with surprising clarity. "Elliot," he said, his voice barely audible. Elliot leaned closer. "I'm here, Dad." "The South Ridge Vineyard," Harold whispered. "Promise me you won't tear out those old vines." Of all the things his father might have said in what could be his final moments, this request, so specific, so connected to the land they both loved despite their differences, struck Elliot deeply. "I promise," he said, meaning it. Harold's eyes drifted closed, but his hand tightened slightly around Elliot's. "Your mother," he murmured. "Find her. Tell her I'm sorry." "I will," Elliot promised, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. His father's next words were so faint, Elliot had to lean even closer to hear them. "Don't become me, son. Don't die alone." The simple truth of the statement, that Harold Ward, for all his wealth and power, was dying alone except for the son he had alienated, hit Elliot with devastating force. Was this the future he was building for himself? An empire of vineyards and no one to share them with? Harold drifted back into unconsciousness after that, his breathing growing more irregular. Elliot remained at his side, the promise he had made echoing in his mind. Late in the afternoon, Janelle entered with 2 cups of fresh coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting one beside Elliot. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure," Elliot admitted. "Everything feels unreal." Janelle nodded in understanding. "That's normal. Your mind is protecting you from processing too much at once." "He made me promise not to become him," Elliot said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "Not to die alone." Janelle's eyes filled with compassion. "That sounds like good advice. Is it that simple? Just decide not to be like him?" Elliot asked, frustration edging into his voice. "I've spent my entire adult life becoming exactly what he raised me to be, cold, calculating, focused only on success. I don't know how to be anything else." "Maybe it's not about becoming something entirely different," Janelle suggested gently. "Maybe it's about keeping the good parts, your determination, your intelligence, and letting go of the rest." "And how do I do that?" "One choice at a time," she said simply. "Like choosing to be here with him today, instead of at your board meeting." Elliot glanced at his father's still form. "Fat lot of good it's done. He's still dying." "Yes, but he's not dying alone," Janelle pointed out quietly. "That matters, Elliot, more than you might realize right now." The use of his first name, spoken with such genuine care, broke through something in Elliot's carefully constructed defenses. He felt tears threatening, tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since he was 8 years old. "I should get back to my other patients," Janelle said, sensing his need for privacy. "I'll check back soon." As she reached the door, Elliot called after her. "Janelle, thank you for everything." She smiled, the simple gesture somehow lighting up the somber room. "You're welcome." Left alone with his father again, Elliot found himself talking, the words coming easier now that Harold couldn't respond. "I never told anyone this," he said softly, "but I remember the day Mom left. Not just her walking out the door, but the night before. She came to my room and sat on my bed for a long time, just watching me. I pretended to be asleep, but I could feel her there, and I could hear her crying. The memory, long buried, surfaced with painful clarity. In the morning, she was gone. You told me she'd left us, and I never questioned it. I was so angry at her for not saying goodbye. Now I wonder if she tried, in her way." Harold's breathing hitched, then steadied into a new, even more labored rhythm. Elliot watched the rise and fall of his father's chest, each breath seeming more difficult than the last. "I wish I knew why it was so hard for you to love me," Elliot whispered. "Was I too much like her? Not enough like you? Or were you just so afraid of being hurt again that you couldn't risk it?" The questions that had haunted Elliot's childhood hung in the air, unanswered, and now perhaps unanswerable. But somehow, asking them aloud lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The light outside the window began to fade as afternoon gave way to evening. Elliot remained in his chair, watching his father's life slowly slip away. Nurses came and went. Dr. Chen visited briefly, confirming what Elliot already knew. The end was very near. At 7 o'clock, Janelle returned, still in her scrubs despite the end of her shift. "I thought I'd stay a while longer," she said simply. taking the chair on the other side of Harold's bed. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Elliot asked, touched by her gesture but aware of the imposition. "My grandmother is bringing me dinner," she replied. "She understands." As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. An elderly woman entered, carrying a thermal bag that smelled tantalizingly of home-cooked food. "Nana, this is Elliot Ward," Janelle said. "Elliot, this is my grandmother, Ruby Rivers." Ruby was a small woman with dignified bearing and kind eyes that seemed to see right through Elliot's carefully constructed facade. "So you're the young man my Janelle's been talking about," she said, her voice warm but appraising. "Nana," Janelle protested softly, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. Ruby's gaze shifted to Harold, her expression softening with understanding. "It's a hard road watching a parent go," she said to Elliot, "even when things weren't always right between you." "You didn't know my father," Elliot said, a reflexive defensiveness in his tone. "No, but I know that look in your eyes," Ruby replied, unperturbed. "It's the look of someone with unfinished business." There was something about Ruby Rivers that reminded Elliot of Janelle, the same directness, the same lack of pretense. It was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "I brought enough for both of you," Ruby said, unpacking containers of food. "Janelle told me you've been here all day without a proper meal." "That's very kind, but I'm not hungry," Elliot began. "Nonsense," Ruby cut him off. "The body needs fuel, especially in times of stress. Now eat." To his own surprise, Elliot found himself obeying, accepting a container of what turned out to be the most delicious chicken stew he had ever tasted. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first bite. "Thank you, Mrs. Rivers," he said after a few mouthfuls. "This is incredible." "Ruby," she corrected him, "and you're welcome. Food is love made visible, my mother always said." As they ate, Ruby shared stories about raising Janelle, about losing her own daughter in childbirth, about building a life that honored that loss without being defined by it. She spoke without self-pity or bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of life's hardships and joys. Elliot found himself drawn into her stories, momentarily distracted from the grim vigil he was keeping. He noticed how Janelle looked at her grandmother, with love, respect, and a comfortable familiarity that spoke of a lifetime of secure attachment. "You raised an amazing woman," Elliot said, when Ruby paused. Ruby's eyes twinkled. "I like to think I had a hand in it, but Janelle came into this world with a good heart. All I did was make sure the world didn't harden it." Janelle rolled her eyes affectionately. "Nana thinks I'm still that 8-year-old girl who brought home injured birds." "You are," Ruby insisted, "just with better medical training now." The easy banter between them, the obvious love they shared, made Elliot acutely aware of what had been missing in his own life, not just the absence of his mother, but the emotional wasteland his father had created in their home after she left. A sudden change in Harold's breathing interrupted the moment. The labored rhythm that had been constant for hours shifted, becoming more irregular, with long pauses between breaths. Janelle moved quickly to check the monitors, her professional demeanor returning. "I think we should call Dr. Chen," she said softly. Ruby stood, gathering the remains of their meal. "I'll leave you to it. Janelle, I'll be in the waiting room if you need me." As she passed Elliot, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Strength to you, young man. Remember, whatever happens next, you don't have to face it alone." The simple kindness from this woman who barely knew him touched Elliot deeply. "Thank you, Ruby." After she left, Janelle paged Dr. Chen and then returned to Harold's bedside. "The breathing pattern has changed," she explained quietly. "It's called Cheney-Stokes respiration. It often occurs near the end." Elliot nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He took his father's hand again, noticing how cold it had become. "Talk to him," Janelle encouraged. "Hearing is often the last sense to go. He may still be able to hear you." "What do I say?" Elliot asked, feeling helpless in the face of death's approach. "Whatever you need him to know," Janelle said simply. Dr. Chen arrived, confirmed what Janelle had already indicated, and spoke quietly about what to expect in these final moments. He offered to stay, but Elliot shook his head. This last vigil felt intensely private. After the doctor left, Janelle moved toward the door. "I'll give you some privacy." "No," Elliot said quickly. "Please stay. I don't want to be alone for this." She nodded, resuming her seat on the other side of the bed, a quiet presence offering silent support. Elliot turned his attention back to his father. "Dad," he began, the word still unfamiliar after years of formal address. "I don't know if you can hear me, but there are things I need to say." He paused, struggling to find words for the complex emotions swirling inside him. I spent so many years trying to be what you wanted. Strong, ruthless, successful. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, accomplished enough, you might finally be proud. Might finally show some sign that I mattered to you. Harold's breathing continued its irregular pattern, each inhalation a struggle, each exhalation a surrender. I was so angry when you started talking about regrets, Elliot continued. It felt like you were pulling the rug out from under everything I'd built my life on. But now I think maybe you were trying to give me a gift, the chance to learn from your mistakes, instead of having to make them all myself. Tears welled in Elliot's eyes, no longer held at bay by the emotional control he had practiced for so long. I don't know if I can forgive you for the lies about Mom, for the years of emotional distance, but I understand better now why you became who you were. And I'm trying not to hate you for it. Across the bed, Janelle sat quietly, her presence a testament to a different kind of strength, not the cold, isolated power that Elliot and his father had cultivated, but the warm, connected resilience that came from genuine human bonds. I'll find Mom, Elliot promised again, his voice breaking. I'll tell her you're sorry, and I'll try not to become you, not the bitter, lonely part of you anyway. Harold's breathing grew even more labored, the pauses between breaths extending. The monitors showed his heart rate slowing, his oxygen levels dropping despite the supplemental oxygen flowing through the nasal cannula. I think it's very soon now, Janelle said softly. Would you like me to call anyone else? Is there family that should be here? Elliot shook his head. There's no one else, just me. The reality of that statement, that Harold Ward, who had once commanded a room full of business associates with his mere presence, was dying with only his estranged son and a kind nurse at his bedside, struck Elliot with terrible clarity. This was the legacy of pushing people away, of valuing success over connection, of seeing vulnerability as weakness. I'm here, Dad, Elliot said, tightening his grip on his father's hand. You're not alone. Harold's eyes opened suddenly, surprising both Elliot and Janelle. For a brief moment they seemed clear and focused, fixed on his son's face, with an intensity that took Elliot's breath away. Elliot, Harold whispered, the word barely audible. I'm here, Elliot repeated, leaning closer. Harold's lips moved again, but whatever he was trying to say was lost as his breathing faltered. His eyes drifted closed again, and the hand in Elliot's went completely limp. The heart monitor's steady beeping transformed into a single, continuous tone. He's gone, Janelle said gently, reaching across to stop the alarm. Elliot sat frozen, still holding his father's hand, unable to process the finality of the moment. Harold Ward, the towering figure who had shaped every aspect of Elliot's life, for better and worse, was gone. I'll give you a moment alone, Janelle said, standing. I'll be right outside when you're ready. After she left, Elliot remained beside his father's body, tears finally flowing freely down his face. They were tears not just for the father he had lost today, but for the father he had never really had. The man who might have shown him how to be strong without being cold, successful without being ruthless, loved without being weak. Goodbye, Dad, he whispered, finally releasing Harold's hand. When Elliot emerged from the room some time later, Janelle was waiting as promised. Without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a simple human gesture of comfort. For a moment, Elliot stiffened, unaccustomed to such physical contact without romantic intent. But then, something broke inside him, and he found himself clinging to her, accepting the solace she offered. I'm so sorry, Elliot, she murmured against his shoulder. When they finally separated, Elliot felt both emptied and somehow lighter, as if the tears he had shed had washed away some of the hardened layers around his heart. What happens now? He asked, suddenly lost in the practical aftermath of death. Dr. Chen will come to pronounce him officially, Janelle explained gently. Then there are some forms for you to sign. Do you have a funeral home you'd like us to contact? The questions were so mundane, so at odds with the emotional magnitude of what had just happened, that Elliot almost laughed. I have no idea, he admitted. My father handled all the family business like that. That's okay, Janelle assured him. We can help with the arrangements. There's no rush. Ruby appeared in the hallway, taking in the situation with a glance. It's over? She asked quietly. Janelle nodded. Then you'll be coming home with me tonight, Ruby said to Elliot, her tone brooking no argument. No one should be alone after losing a parent. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose, Elliot began. It's not an imposition. It's what people do for each other, Ruby interrupted. You need a hot meal, a comfortable chair, and people around you who understand grief. My house has all three. Elliot looked to Janelle, who smiled encouragingly. "My grandmother doesn't take no for an answer," she warned him. "And she's right, you shouldn't be alone tonight." Something about the genuine concern in both women's eyes broke through Elliot's habitual self-reliance. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd like that." The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet arrangements. Elliot moved through it all in a state of numb efficiency, falling back on the business skills that had defined his adult life. Only now those skills were being applied to the most personal of tasks, the final disposition of his father's remains. By the time they left the hospital, it was well past midnight. Elliot followed Ruby's modest sedan in his Porsche, the contrast between their vehicles a stark reminder of the different worlds they inhabited. Ruby's home was exactly as Elliot had imagined it, small but immaculately kept, filled with photographs, handmade quilts, and the lingering scent of home cooking. It was nothing like the sterile luxury of his own mansion, yet it felt more like a home than any place he had lived since childhood. "The guest room is made up," Ruby said, leading him through the house. "Bathrooms across the hall. There are fresh towels on the bed." "Thank you," Elliot said, feeling awkward and out of place in this warm, lived-in home. "For all of this." "It's what neighbors do," Ruby replied simply. "Now, are you hungry? I can warm up some food." Elliot shook his head. "I'm just tired, I think." "Then get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning." As Ruby turned to leave, Elliot called after her. "Mrs. Rivers, Ruby, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you do it? Raise Janelle on your own after losing your daughter? How did you not become bitter or resentful?" Ruby's eyes softened with understanding. "Who says I didn't? There were days, especially early on, when I was so angry I could barely breathe. Angry at God, at the doctors, at the unfairness of it all." "But you didn't stay that way," Elliot observed. "No, because I had a choice to make. I could let that anger consume me, or I could channel it into loving that little girl who needed me." Ruby's face grew thoughtful. "The heart is a muscle, Elliot. It gets stronger with use, not by being protected." The simple wisdom of her words struck Elliot deeply. All his life he had been protecting his heart, from rejection, from disappointment, from the kind of pain his father had experienced when his mother left. But in doing so, had he made it weaker, not stronger? "Thank you," he said again, unable to articulate the full extent of his gratitude for her insight. "Get some rest," Ruby repeated, patting his arm gently. "Tomorrow is soon enough for big thoughts." Alone in the guest room, Elliot sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. His father was dead. The complicated, difficult relationship that had defined so much of his life was over, leaving behind a void filled with unanswered questions and unresolved feelings. And yet, in the midst of this loss, Elliot found himself in a stranger's home, surrounded by a warmth and compassion he had done nothing to earn. The contrast between the cold, transactional world he had built for himself and the genuine human connection offered by Janelle and Ruby was impossible to ignore. As exhaustion finally claimed him, Elliot's last conscious thought was of Janelle's face, not pitying but understanding, not demanding but offering. In the darkness of grief, her quiet strength had become an unexpected beacon, guiding him toward a version of himself he had never dared to imagine. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and the quiet sounds of a household awakening. Elliot lay in the unfamiliar bed, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. His father was gone. The reality of it settled over him anew, heavy but somehow less raw than the night before. When he finally emerged from the guest room, he found Janelle in the kitchen, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater rather than her hospital scrubs. The change of attire made her seem both more familiar and more unknown, a person with a life beyond the hospital corridors where they had met. "Good morning," she said with a gentle smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Elliot admitted. "Your grandmother's guest bed is surprisingly comfortable. Nana believes in good mattresses. She says life is too short for bad beds and cheap coffee." Janelle handed him a steaming mug. Speaking of which, the coffee was rich and strong, exactly what Elliot needed. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done yesterday without you." "You would have managed," Janelle said with quiet confidence. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Before Elliot could respond, his phone, which he had finally turned back on that morning, began ringing. The screen showed Thomas Reynolds' name. "I should take this," Elliot said apologetically. Janelle nodded understanding. "I'll give you some privacy." As she left the kitchen, Elliot answered the call, bracing himself for the business crisis he had been ignoring. "Elliot, finally," Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. "We've been trying to reach you for nearly 2 days. The board is in an uproar, the Miller deal is completely off the table, and there are rumors circulating that you've had some kind of breakdown. My father died last night, Elliot said, the words coming out flat and factual. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry to hear that, Thomas said, his tone softening slightly. But Elliot, the company needs you. We're facing a serious situation here. A week ago, even 2 days ago, Elliot would have already been heading for his car, ready to rush back to Ward Estates and take control of the crisis. The business had always come first, just as his father had taught him. But now, standing in Ruby River's warm kitchen, with the memory of his father's final words still fresh in his mind, "Don't become me, son. Don't die alone." The urgency of the business crisis seemed somehow diminished. "I'll be in tomorrow," Elliot said decisively. "Today I need to make arrangements for my father." "Tomorrow? Elliot, we need you now. The shareholders will have to wait," Elliot interrupted. "My father just died, Thomas. The company has survived without me for 2 days. It can manage one more." He ended the call before Thomas could argue further, feeling a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in his adult life, Elliot had put something ahead of Ward Estates, not out of weakness, but out of a growing recognition that some things mattered more than business. Janelle returned to the kitchen, a question in her eyes but no demands on her lips. "Work," Elliot explained simply. "Apparently the world is ending because I've been unavailable for 2 days." "Is it?" Janelle asked with a small smile. "Probably not," Elliot admitted, "though the Miller deal is definitely dead." "I'm sorry, that sounds important." Elliot shrugged. "It is. Or it was. I'm not sure anymore." He took another sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I need to arrange my father's funeral today. Would your grandmother know of a good funeral home? I don't even know where to start." "Of course," Janelle said. "Nana knows everyone in Oakland. She'll have recommendations." "I was thinking Sonoma," Elliot said hesitantly, "near the vineyard. My father loved that land even if he showed it in strange ways." Janelle's eyes softened. "I think that sounds perfect." Ruby appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day. "Morning, you two. Elliot, there's breakfast if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast." "That sounds wonderful," Elliot said, realizing he was actually hungry for the first time in days. "Ruby, I was hoping you might help me find a funeral home in Sonoma for my father." Ruby nodded, unsurprised by the request. "I know a place. Small, family-run, very respectful. Not one of those corporate chains that treat death like a business transaction." "Thank you," Elliot said sincerely. "I'd appreciate the recommendation." As they sat around Ruby's kitchen table eating breakfast, the conversation turned to Harold. What kind of service he might have wanted, whether there were friends or business associates who should be notified. To Elliot's surprise, he found comfort in talking about his father in this setting, with these women who had no stake in the Ward fortune or legacy. "He was complicated," Elliot said at one point. "Brilliant with business, terrible with people, including me." Ruby nodded, understanding. "Most of us are more than one thing, especially to our children. My Janelle's mother was the kindest soul you'd ever meet, but stubborn as a mule when she thought she was right. Nearly drove me crazy some days." "Nana," Janelle protested gently. "It's the truth," Ruby insisted. "And saying it doesn't mean I loved her any less. We don't honor the dead by pretending they were perfect." The simple wisdom of her words resonated with Elliot. Perhaps he didn't need to reconcile all his complicated feelings about his father right away. Perhaps it was enough for now to acknowledge both the harm Harold had done and the man he had been trying to become at the end. After breakfast, Ruby made a phone call to the funeral home while Elliot and Janelle washed the dishes, a domestic task Elliot couldn't remember ever performing before. "I have the day off," Janelle said as she handed him a plate to dry, "if you'd like company while you make the arrangements." The offer touched Elliot deeply. "I'd like that very much, but I don't want to take up your whole day. You must have other things to do." Janelle looked at him directly, her dark eyes serious. "Elliot, I'm offering because I want to be there, not out of obligation." The simple honesty of her statement left Elliot momentarily speechless. In his world of strategic relationships and calculated interactions, such straightforward human connection was rare. "Thank you," he said finally. "I'd be grateful for your company." The day unfolded in a series of practical tasks, meeting with the funeral director, selecting a casket, discussing service options. Throughout it all, Janelle remained at Elliot's side, offering quiet support without taking over. As they drove from the funeral home to a florist to discuss arrangements, Elliot found himself sharing stories about his father that he had never told anyone, small moments of connection amid the general emotional wasteland of their relationship. He taught me to drive in an old truck on the vineyard roads, Elliot remembered. I was only 14, too young for a license, but he said every man should know how to handle a vehicle on difficult terrain. He was actually patient that day, didn't yell once when I ground the gears. Janelle listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. With each story, Elliot felt as though he was piecing together a more complete picture of his father. Not just the cold businessman or the regretful dying man, but all the complex facets in between. By late afternoon, the necessary arrangements had been made. Harold's body would be cremated, and a small service would be held at the vineyard in 3 days' time. Elliot had compiled a surprisingly short list of people to notify, business associates mostly, with few personal friends. As they drove back toward Oakland, Elliot found himself reluctant for the day to end. Tomorrow he would have to return to Ward Estates, face the business crisis, resume his role as the cold, calculating heir to the wine empire. The thought filled him with a strange reluctance. "Would you like to get dinner?" he asked impulsively as they neared the city. "As a thank you for all your help today," Janelle smiled. "I'd like that, but no fancy restaurants, okay? Somewhere normal people go." The request, so contrary to Elliot's usual dating venues of exclusive clubs and high-end restaurants, made him smile. Define normal. Good food, reasonable prices, servers who introduce themselves by their first names, Janelle listed with a touch of humor. A place where you don't need a reservation 3 months in advance. "I think I can manage that," Elliot said, enjoying the light moment amid the heaviness of the day. They ended up at a small Italian restaurant that Janelle recommended, family-owned, unpretentious, with red-checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. It was nothing like the establishments where Elliot usually dined, yet he found himself immediately comfortable in the warm, noisy space. Over pasta and wine, their conversation drifted away from Harold and funerals to more personal territory. Elliot found himself genuinely curious about Janelle, her childhood with Ruby, her decision to become a nurse, her dreams for the future. "I always knew I wanted to help people," she explained when he asked about her career choice. "After watching my grandmother care for our neighbors, our church members, anyone who needed it really, she showed me that compassion isn't just a feeling, it's a practice, something you do every day." "You're good at it," Elliot said sincerely. "Not just the medical part, but the human part. The way you were with my father. I've never seen him respond to anyone like that before." Janelle smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Your father was searching for connection at the end. Most people are when they face death. All the barriers we put up during life, pride, fear, old grudges, they start to seem so pointless when time is running out." "He told me not to become him," Elliot admitted, swirling the wine in his glass. "Not to die alone." "That sounds like hard-earned wisdom," Janelle observed. "The thing is," Elliot continued, feeling his way through thoughts he had never articulated before, "I'm not sure I know how to be different. I've spent so long being who he taught me to be, focused on success, suspicious of emotion, keeping people at a distance. It's become who I am." Janelle considered him thoughtfully. "Is it, though? The Elliot Ward I've seen these past few days has shown compassion, vulnerability, a willingness to question his assumptions. That doesn't sound like someone who's incapable of change." Her faith in him, this woman who had seen him at his most raw and vulnerable, touched something deep in Elliot's heart. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, he felt truly seen, not for his wealth or his business acumen or his physical appearance, but for the person he might become if he found the courage to change. As the evening drew to a close, Elliot faced another decision. Tomorrow he would return to his world of boardrooms and balance sheets. But tonight he found himself unwilling to go back to his empty mansion, to the isolation he had cultivated for so long. "Would your grandmother mind if I stayed one more night?" he asked as they left the restaurant. "I promise I'll be out of your hair tomorrow." "Of course she wouldn't mind," Janelle assured him. "Nana loves having people in the house. She says it keeps the walls from getting lonely." The simple acceptance, offered without question or condition, was another revelation to Elliot. In his experience, people always wanted something in return for their kindness. But Janelle and Ruby seemed to operate by different rules based on human connection rather than transaction. As they drove back to Ruby's house, Elliot felt something shifting inside him, a crack in the foundation of the man he had built himself to be, allowing a glimpse of someone new to emerge. Not a complete transformation, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of one, sparked by his father's death and nurtured by the unexpected kindness of 2 women who asked for nothing in return. And as he glanced at Janelle in the passenger seat, her profile illuminated by the passing streetlights, Elliot felt something else stirring, a feeling he had spent a lifetime avoiding, a vulnerability he had been taught to fear. But for the first time, that fear was balanced by something new, hope that perhaps vulnerability wasn't weakness after all, but the beginning of strength he had never known. The morning sun cast long shadows across the vineyards of Ward Estates as Elliot's Porsche wound its way up the familiar drive. After 3 days away, he was returning to the empire that had defined his life, but he was not the same man who had left. His father's funeral had been the previous day, a small, dignified affair attended by business associates who spoke of Harold's vision and determination, but offered few personal anecdotes. The absence of genuine grief among the attendees had been striking, a stark reminder of the isolated life Harold had chosen. Only Janelle and Ruby, sitting quietly in the back row, had seemed to understand the complex emotions Elliot was experiencing. Their presence had anchored him through the empty condolences and business-focused conversations that had dominated the reception. Now, as he parked in his reserved space outside the main office building, Elliot took a deep breath, preparing to step back into his role as CEO. The glass and steel structure loomed before him, impressive and cold, much like the business persona he had cultivated for so long. "Mr. Ward," his assistant greeted him as he entered, her expression a careful mix of professional efficiency and appropriate sympathy. "The board is waiting in the conference room. I'm very sorry about your father." "Thank you, Claire," Elliot replied, surprised to realize he couldn't remember the last time he had used her name. Had he always been this distant with the people who worked for him? The boardroom fell silent as Elliot entered. 8 faces turned toward him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to carefully concealed ambition. These were people who had worked with him for years, yet in this moment they felt like strangers. "Gentlemen," Elliot said, taking his place at the head of the table, "thank you for your patience during my absence. I understand we have some issues to discuss." Thomas Reynolds cleared his throat. "Elliot, first, let me offer condolences on behalf of the entire board. Your father was a visionary in this industry." The words were appropriate but empty, the same generic praise that had been offered at the funeral. Elliot nodded acknowledgement and moved on. "The Miller deal," he said. "Where do we stand?" "Gone," Thomas replied bluntly. "Paul Miller signed with Westridge Vineyards yesterday. He said he couldn't risk the instability at Ward Estates." A week ago, this news would have enraged Elliot, triggering a ruthless response aimed at reclaiming the lost ground and possibly destroying Miller in the process. Now, he found himself considering Paul Miller's perspective with unexpected empathy. "His father and mine were friends," Elliot said quietly. "Did we ever acknowledge that relationship in our negotiations?" The board members exchanged puzzled glances. "The focus was on maximizing our distribution percentages," the finance director explained. "Personal relationships weren't factored into the strategy." "Perhaps they should have been," Elliot mused, surprising himself as much as the board. "What else?" For the next 2 hours, Elliot listened as the board outlined the various crises that had developed during his absence. Stock fluctuations, nervous investors, competitors seizing on rumors of instability. Throughout the discussion, he found his perspective shifting, seeing opportunities for connection where before he would have seen only leverage points. "I'll reach out to Paul Miller personally," he decided as the meeting concluded. "Not about the deal, that ship has sailed, but to rebuild the relationship. His father supported mine when Ward Estates was just starting. We should honor that history." As the board members filed out, Thomas Reynolds lingered behind, concern evident on his face. "Elliot, are you sure you're ready to be back? You seem different." "My father just died, Thomas," Elliot replied, not unkindly. "That tends to change a person's perspective." "Of course," Thomas said quickly. "I just mean, the board is concerned about the direction of the company. Your father built Ward Estates on aggressive expansion and profit maximization. Some of your comments today suggested a different approach." Elliot considered the man before him, a loyal lieutenant who had followed Harold's business philosophy without question. "The company isn't changing its commitment to excellence," he assured him, "but perhaps we've been defining excellence too narrowly." Left alone in the boardroom, Elliot moved to the wall of windows overlooking the vast Ward vineyards. The vines stretched toward the horizon, ordered rows against the California landscape. He thought of his promise to his father, not to tear out the old vines on the South Ridge property, despite their declining yield. "The wine they produce has depth you can't get from new plantings," Harold had said. Only now did Elliot begin to understand what his father had meant. Some things couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or profit margins. Some things had value precisely because they couldn't be quantified. His phone buzzed with a text message from Janelle. "How's your first day back? Thinking of you." The simple message brought a smile to Elliot's face. In the 3 days since his father's death, Janelle had become a steady presence in his life. Not pushing, not demanding, just there with her quiet strength and genuine concern. "Surprisingly good," he texted back. "Different perspective on things. Dinner tonight?" Her reply came quickly. "Would love to, but fair warning, 12-hour shift today. Might not be great company. I'll bring takeout to your place," he offered. "You can fall asleep mid-sentence if needed." The easy banter felt foreign to Elliot, who had always approached relationships as strategic endeavors with clear objectives. With Janelle, there was no agenda, no calculation, just a genuine desire to see her, even tired after a long shift. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, Elliot moving through his familiar role, but with a new awareness of the people around him. He found himself asking questions he had never bothered with before, about families, about perspectives, about the human factors behind the business decisions. By evening, he had made several decisions that would have been unthinkable a week ago. He called Paul Miller directly, not to pressure him about the contract, but to express genuine regret that their father's friendship hadn't continued to the next generation. He approved a flexible work arrangement for his assistant, Claire, who had been struggling to care for an elderly parent. He cancelled plans for an aggressive takeover of a smaller competitor, opting instead for a potential partnership discussion. Each decision felt like a small step away from the man his father had shaped him to be, yet somehow also an honoring of the wisdom Harold had tried to impart at the end, that success without connection was ultimately hollow. As promised, Elliot arrived at Janelle's modest apartment that evening with bags of takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. She answered the door in scrubs, her hair loose around her shoulders, exhaustion evident in her eyes, but a genuine smile lighting her face at the sight of him. "You're a lifesaver," she said, welcoming him in. "I was seriously considering whether cereal could count as dinner." Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books, plants, and photographs. It felt lived in, personal in a way Elliot's expansive mansion never had. "How was your shift?" he asked as they settled on her couch with containers of food. "Long," she admitted. "We lost a patient today. Elderly man with heart failure. His whole family was there, 3 generations saying goodbye. It was sad, but beautiful too in its way." Elliot thought of his father's lonely death, with only himself and Janelle present. "That's how it should be," he said quietly. "Not alone." Janelle's eyes softened with understanding. "How was your day, the return of the prodigal CEO?" "Surprising," Elliot admitted. "I saw everything differently. People, decisions, priorities. It was like looking at a familiar landscape from a new angle." "Your father's death," Janelle observed. "It changes your perspective." "Not just his death," Elliot said, meeting her eyes. "You, your grandmother, the way you both live so authentically. It made me question a lot of things I've always taken for granted." A hint of color touched Janelle's cheeks. "We're nothing special, Elliot. Just people trying to do right by each other." "That's exactly what makes you special," he insisted. "In my world, people are assets or obstacles, not people." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I'm trying to see differently," he said honestly. "I'm not sure I know how yet, but I want to learn." The vulnerability of the admission hung between them, new and fragile. Janelle reached across the couch and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "That's brave," she said simply. They talked late into the night, Janelle's fatigue forgotten as they shared stories, hopes, and the small details of their lives that made them who they were. Elliot found himself telling her about his childhood before his mother left. Memories he had suppressed for decades now emerging with surprising clarity. "She used to sing in the kitchen," he remembered. "My father would come home from work and just stand in the doorway watching her, this look on his face like he couldn't believe she was real." "He loved her," Janelle observed. "Yes," Elliot agreed, "and it destroyed him when she left. That's why he taught me that love was weakness, because for him it was. But it doesn't have to be," Janelle said quietly. "Love can be strength too, if you let it." As the evening drew to a close, Elliot found himself reluctant to leave. There was a comfort in Janelle's presence, a sense of being accepted exactly as he was, while also being gently challenged to become more. "I should go," he said finally, noting how her eyes were struggling to stay open. "You need sleep." "Thank you for coming," she said, walking him to the door. "It was exactly what I needed after today." On impulse, Elliot leaned down and kissed her cheek, a gesture so innocent, yet so intimate. that it made his heart race. Good night, Janelle. The drive back to his empty mansion gave Elliot time to reflect on the day, on the changes beginning to take root in his professional decisions, on the strange new feeling of connection he was experiencing with Janelle. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, this vulnerability he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The following weeks brought more changes, some small, others more significant. At Ward Estates, Elliot initiated a review of their business practices, looking for places where ruthless efficiency had come at the cost of human relationships. He began spending more time in the vineyards, talking with the workers who tended the vines, learning their names and stories. And most evenings, he found himself with Janelle, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at local restaurants she introduced him to, occasionally at arts events or community gatherings that would never have been on his social calendar before. Their relationship evolved gradually, a natural progression from friendship to something deeper. Their first real kiss happened on a foggy evening after they had attended a community theater production, nothing like the calculated seductions Elliot had engineered in his previous relationships, just a genuine moment of connection that left them both breathless. "I never expected you," Janelle admitted that night, her hands framing his face. "When I met you in that hospital room, all cold and controlled, I never imagined this." "I never expected me either," Elliot replied with a rueful smile. "This version of me, I'm still figuring him out. I like this version," she said simply. 1 month after Harold's death, Elliot found himself parked once again outside the modest house in Oakland where his mother lived. This time he had called ahead. This time he was expected. Patricia Delgado opened the door herself, a slender woman in her 50s with familiar green eyes and a hesitant smile. "Elliot," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you look so much like your father." "Hello, Mom," he replied, the word unfamiliar on his lips after so many years. The reunion was awkward, emotional, filled with long-buried pain and 21 years of absence. They sat in her sunny kitchen while her husband tactfully made himself scarce, giving mother and son the privacy they needed. "I wanted to take you with me," Patricia said, tears welling in her eyes. "You have to believe that. But your father's lawyers, his money, his threats. I was a teacher with no resources. He said he would destroy me if I tried to fight for custody." "I know," Elliot said quietly. "He told me." At the end, Patricia's eyes widened in surprise. "He admitted it. He had a lot of regrets," Elliot explained. "Things he wanted me to know before it was too late." The conversation that followed was difficult but healing, each of them sharing their perspective on the family fracture that had shaped their lives. Patricia spoke of her attempts to contact Elliot over the years, letters and calls intercepted by Harold. Elliot shared the emotional wasteland his childhood had become after she left, the walls he had built around his heart. "I'm so sorry," Patricia said, reaching for his hand across the table. "I should have fought harder, should have found a way." "He was very good at getting what he wanted," Elliot said, not excusing but understanding. "And you were right about what he became, cold, unreachable. He passed that on to me." "Not completely," Patricia observed, studying her son's face. "There's something different about you now. Your eyes are softer." Elliot thought of Janelle, of Ruby, of the changes beginning to take root in his life. "I'm trying to be different," he admitted, "to not repeat his mistakes, our mistakes." When he left his mother's house hours later, with plans to meet again soon, Elliot felt another piece of his past settling into place, not erased or forgotten, but acknowledged and beginning to heal. He called Janelle from the car. "I saw my mom," he said when she answered. "Oh, Elliot, how was it? Hard, good, necessary?" He paused, feeling the weight of what he wanted to say next. "I want you to meet her. Not today, but soon." The significance of the request wasn't lost on either of them. In Elliot's world, introductions to family meant something serious, something intentional. "I'd like that," Janelle replied softly. 2 months after Harold's death, Elliot made another decision that would have been unthinkable before. He invited Janelle to move into the Ward mansion with him. "It's too big," he admitted, as they stood in the cavernous entryway. "Too cold, too much like my father. But with you here, maybe it could become something else, something warmer." Janelle looked around at the imposing space, her practical nature evident in her expression. "That's a lot of house for 2 people, Elliot. Then we'll close off the parts we don't need," he said. "Or better yet, find a new purpose for them. The East Wing could be a community space maybe, for local events or education programs. The suggestion, so contrary to the careful guarding of wealth and privacy that had defined Ward estates for generations, made Janelle smile. "You really are changing," she observed. "Because of you," he said, taking her hands in his. "No," she corrected gently, "because you're choosing to, every day, with every decision. I'm just lucky enough to be here watching it happen." Their life together developed a rhythm, Janelle continuing her nursing work, now at a community clinic closer to the vineyard. Elliot restructuring Ward estates with a new emphasis on sustainable practices and community engagement. They hosted dinners where vineyard workers sat alongside business executives, created a scholarship program for local students, opened parts of the estate for community events. Ruby was a frequent visitor, her practical wisdom and warm presence filling the once cold mansion with life. She and Elliot developed their own relationship, bonding over a shared love of cooking that surprised everyone, including Elliot himself. "So your father would hardly recognize this place," Ruby observed one evening as they prepared dinner together, the kitchen filled with delicious aromas and comfortable conversation. "No," Elliot agreed, "but I think at the end he might have approved. He was trying to tell me something important. I just didn't understand it until it was too late." "It's never too late to learn," Ruby said with her characteristic directness. "Look at you now." The professional changes were perhaps less dramatic, but no less significant. Elliot maintained Ward Estate's reputation for excellence, but shifted the company culture away from ruthless competition toward collaboration and relationship building. The Miller deal, once thought lost forever, was replaced by a more equitable partnership that honored the historic connection between the families. Most meaningful of all, Elliot kept his promise about the South Ridge vineyard. Not only did he preserve the old vines, but he initiated a research project to document their unique characteristics and history. The first bottles of wine produced exclusively from those vines were labeled Harold's Legacy, a complex vintage with depth that newer plantings couldn't match. It was this wine that Elliot brought with him on the evening of the first anniversary of his father's death. He had asked Janelle to meet him at the South Ridge after her shift, saying only that there was something important he wanted to share with her. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the vineyard as Elliot waited, the velvet box in his pocket, both a weight and a promise. When Janelle's car appeared on the winding road, his heart raced with an emotion he had once feared but now embraced. Love, with all its vulnerability and strength. She was beautiful in simple jeans and a blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile warming him from across the vineyard as she approached. "This is beautiful," she said, taking in the view of the valley below. "Is this the famous South Ridge your father wanted you to preserve?" Elliot nodded, taking her hand and leading her between the rows of gnarled vines. "These were planted by my grandfather. My father believed they had something special that couldn't be replicated or improved upon." "And was he right?" Janelle asked. In answer, Elliot produced the bottle of Harold's Legacy and 2 glasses he had brought in a small basket. "See for yourself." As they sipped the wine, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, Elliot felt a sense of rightness, of completion. The year since his father's death had been one of profound change, painful at times, challenging always, but ultimately transformative. "My father saw something in you," he said after a comfortable silence. "That first day in the hospital, he responded to you in a way I'd never seen before. It made me curious, made me pay attention." Janelle smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "He was a man looking for connection at the end. I just happened to be there." "No," Elliot disagreed gently. "It was more than that. You have a gift for seeing people as they are, for offering connection without demands. You saw me, really saw me, when I was trying my hardest not to be seen." He set down his glass and took both her hands in his. "You helped me find a better version of myself, not just because of what you did, but because of who you are. Because you showed me what was possible." The moment had arrived. With his heart pounding, Elliot reached into his pocket and produced the velvet box. Janelle's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a ring, not the ostentatious diamond his former self would have chosen, but a simple, elegant design that suited her perfectly. "Janelle," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "this past year has taught me what really matters. Not success or control or power, but connection. Love. You've shown me that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the greatest strength. I want to spend my life learning from you, growing with you, building something real together." He took a deep breath, ready to ask the question that would change everything. But before he could speak, Janelle gently touched his hand, her eyes searching his. "Elliot," she said softly, "I need to ask you something first. Are you doing this because you love me, or because you're afraid to lose me?" The question hung in the air between them, challenging and profound. A year ago, Elliot Ward would have had a ready answer, smooth and calculated to achieve his objective. But the man he had become, the man Janelle had helped him discover, knew that only the truth would do. He looked into her eyes, vulnerable and open in a way he once would have considered unthinkable, poised at the moment of greatest risk and greatest possibility.